Gators Breakdown, episode 95 is ready to go. The Gators traveled to Lexington and put together a come-from-behind fourth-quarter rally to defeat Kentucky for the 31st straight time with a final score of 28-27 Gators. I'm your host, David Waters, here on Gators Breakdown. You can find me on Twitter at GatorDave_SEC. And joining me for this episode is Bill Sykes. You can find Bill on Twitter at RealBSykes. That's Sikes. And Will Miles from SEC Country. You can find Will on Twitter at WillMilesSEC. Bill, 2 weeks in a row, it didn't look good, and the Gators find a way at the end to come away with a victory.
Yeah, it's kind of a weird feeling in our mouths here when we digest this whole thing. But they got the win. That's what's most important, and we're going to break down the rest tonight.
Well, it was ugly at times, and you were not one too happy with offensive coordinator Doug Nussmeier.
Well, I wrote an article today, came out, and talked about the sort of the path to victory. And, I think last week you could say that Florida deserved to win the game. I'm not sure you could necessarily say that about the game yesterday. I mean, obviously they won the game. That's what's important. But, you look for markers along the way. You look for progress, and hopefully we'll see more next week.
Remember, before we dive in here, you can find all your Gators Breakdown episodes on SoundCloud, iTunes, and YouTube. Just search on those sites or get the links by following Gators Breakdown on Twitter and on Facebook at Gators Breakdown. Also, when you're on iTunes, please rate and review the show. And also, before we get started, I'm a little under the weather right now, so if the voice cracks or you hear a lot of sniffles, that's coming from me. So, of course, guys, we'll start with the offense here. And again, it looked like the same old, was doing some nice things, but just found ways not to get much going overall. There were hints of things that were happening. Now, we did see some more of the emerging of young playmakers, Kadarius Toney, Malik Davis, the continued big play threat of Tyree Cleveland, and Brandon Powell probably having his best game in a Gator uniform. The big question now is what happens at the quarterback position. I think we were all hoping after last week's final play that Franks could do some more and take the next steps to make this a functional offense, but that just wasn't the case. He looked like a QB that was making his first true road game start. It was the mental lapses that was mainly the issue, and just looking like there was no synchronization with the offense from him. The run game was doing okay, but the passing game was starting to become very stale, with everything being short completions and the like. So in the third quarter, Jim McElwain decided the offense needed a spark, and Luke Del Rio gets his name called, and the offense simply just looked better. It wasn't much because of what Del Rio did with his arm, as it was just him knowing what to do pre-snap and get Florida in the right reads and making some right calls. And offensive line seemed more confident, and that really just helped the offense look more efficient, more cohesive. There was still no excuse for the interception he threw. And if he's going to be the game manager Florida needs, then he has to cut down on those post-snap mistakes that he's prone to making. So, Will, I'll start with you a little bit. Should Del Rio be the option moving forward after what we saw last night?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think there was a marked improvement when he came in the game. Now, you wonder whether that's just because they made a change and gave him a spark, but the other thing is that the offense got much more run heavy after he came in. But, the defense played a lot better after they were able to stay off the field. I think it was Del Rio's second drive. He threw the interception on the first drive. On the second drive, it was like a 9-play drive, lasted about 4 minutes. The defense got a little bit of a blow. And when they came back out, they were able to stop Kentucky, which is something they hadn't been able to do in the first half or really any of the second half at all up until that point. So, you put the guy in there who's going to give you the best chance to win, and I think Del Rio gives you that at this point. I mean, we've seen Zaire, we've seen what Franks can do, and now we've seen what Del Rio can do, and I think the offense looked most coherent with him in there. Franks doesn't look like he's ready yet. I don't think that's a slight on him. He does some things well, but as soon as the coverages were changed post-snap, he really wasn't making the adjustments he needed. There was one play where, there was a 3-man rush, and he got taken down, and there wasn't really any pressure in the pocket. So I'd go with Del Rio, but, I'm not the coach, so we'll see what they do.
Bill, 3 games in, going into a fourth, and there's a quarterback controversy now.
Dave, have you ever seen the movie Shutter Island?
Yes, I have. Yep. That's
okay, I want you to be honest with me.
DiCaprio, right?
If I'm insane and I'm a mental patient, and this is an experiment or some kind of therapy to allow me to continually, digest and dissect the quarterback situation for the University of Florida, and there's some 15-year experiment where y'all are just going to keep letting me do this over and over without really understanding that there's no such thing as University of Florida, Just tell me, man, because I'm starting to feel crazy. Where is the solution to University of Florida's quarterback trouble? We're in year 3. I'm so happy with this win. I promised last week I'd be happy with the win, and I am. I'm so happy that Del Rio came in and shook off the early interception. I'm not ready to throw Franks under the bus. I'm not ready to point any fingers. Well, mostly. but we can't be having this anymore, man. And it is, as much as I do think that there's some maybe semblance of an offensive identity going forward for the season emerging, man, Luke Del Rio is a short-term answer. And yet again, here we are. Who's going to be the quarterback at the University of Florida? I mean, what do you say at this point?
Yeah, I mean, the stats, if you look at the stats, don't really say much. Frank 7 of 12 for 85 yards. Del Rio 9 of 14 for 74 yards. Both had touchdowns. Both were easy uncovered touchdowns from the Kentucky defense in different scenarios there. But as I said, it looked a little more cohesive. But you're right, this is not a long-term fix, and he's going to have to be a game manager if Luke Del Rio is the quarterback from here on out. What Felipe Franks brought to the table was probably the more big play ability, and we, besides the game winner versus Tennessee, just haven't seen anything down the field. The offense just seems to be limited. Not going past his first read, not seeing wide open guys from other receivers. And it just seems like Del Rio is. And Will and I, it was kind of funny. We actually talked about this going into the game last week on our episode, the midweek show last week, of what Del Rio brought to the table and the pre-snap reads that he can give and getting the offense lined up right. And it mainly just seems Jim McElwain, Doug Nussmeier, I'm sure it was a McElwain call, just really wanted the basic part of the offense just to get right, because it just looked like Felipe Franks was lost at times and just not getting the easy things done to be successful in offense.
Yeah, and it's not just that. Like, I noticed at one point, I know for a fact, or I don't know for a fact, I'm 99% sure there was an RPO situation there with Del Rio, because I saw him scan out to the perimeter and he had a screen out to the right, and he looks at it and he's like, it's not there, and he hands off the ball, and I think it was a moderate gain, and that's just what he's going to give you. He's going to be able to make line calls. He's going to be able to survey the defense and know what's going on. I believe he's going to be able to read the defense better than Franks. And he did make a clutch throw or two. That one, it was either third or fourth down, where he threw back across the middle to the back and converted. That was huge. It was huge. I mean, a game-saving throw in every sense of the word. It's just that, as much as I feel like there's probably a sense of comfort for Nuss and for Mac with Del Rio, and I think there's going to be immediate gains to be had there because he can execute the system, I'm not sure that this is good for the growth of the program. And really, I'm a little concerned about Franks at this point. I'm a little bit concerned about his development, and I'm not convinced altogether that is good for him either, although I do think making the change was the right move.
Will, what did you see from Doug Nussmeier, Felipe Franks, and why was going to Del Rio ultimately the right call?
Well, I mean, you and I were sort of texting back and forth during the game, and the opening play of the third quarter, I went back and rewound it on my DVR because it looked like a screen to no one. They had 10 guys blocking, and it's because it was a running play, and the quarterback went the opposite direction of the running back on the first play out of the second half. And, the little trips against Michigan that happened coming out from under center, those sorts of things are the things that are going to happen with a redshirt freshman quarterback. I don't know whether going to Del Rio, I mean, obviously I think going to Del Rio was the right move for this game because they won the game. But I don't know whether that's the right move overall if you're building for next year. Right. As part of the development, right? You take your lumps, you let people yell at you for things not going well, and you deal with it. You don't bring in the guy who's the junior to save the day, or maybe you do. Again, I'm not a coach. I don't know. Maybe they know the team better than I do, and certainly they got a spark. But if they come out next week and Del Rio's starting and you don't have a spark, what do you do? You've sacrificed your long-term development for the short-term win. And the question is the short-term win really getting you anywhere with some of the other warts that we've seen?
Right, and hey, he gets paid millions of dollars to do this. He gets paid $1 million to win games. And I guess, the thing is, Jim McElwain is paid to win games. And I think last night was the ultimate decision in that he needed to win that game. He felt the need to win, was going to going to Luke Del Rio. That was the way to win the game, and that's what he did. That's what he gets paid to do. That was one thing going into this season. Why a lot of people wanted to see Felipe Franks, and it's easier to say before you've even played a game and before you see how this team is playing. Oh, I just want to see this team grow. I want to see progress. But when you're not seeing progress, then you want to see wins however which way possible. And, it's kind of a catch-22, and you can't really have your cake and eat it too in a way. It's if you want development, okay, then you have to be willing to take your lumps. But then you can't really scream at Jim McElwain for, not really going about it in the way he seems fit. If he's going to lose, he would lose. But get me wrong, the pressure would be on him. And if he's losing by playing Felipe Franks, fans are not going to be happy with that. But he chose to go the Luke Del Rio route. He got a win out of it, and now it just still seems to be the question mark. Can he develop a quarterback? Can Felipe Franks be that quarterback he develops? It's a weird way to look at it because he has to win games, but he also has to develop players.
I mean, any decision that a coach makes that wins a ball game, it's really hard to be too critical of that. But it is fair to be concerned for the future implications of that. And I think that's what Will's saying. I mean, where are we going here?
Well, and the other thing is that the run was working on offense in the first half.
Yeah.
And Mac out of the tunnel told Kubelik that they were going to focus on the run, and then they came out of the half and they ran 14 passes and 7 runs. So you've got Franks in a situation where you got to try to protect him, and then the play calling didn't match that at all. And in the 2 touchdown drives where they actually scored in the fourth quarter, consisted of 8 passes and 13 runs, and in all 4 touchdown drives, they had 21 runs and 12 passes. So when they're protecting their quarterbacks, they're moving the ball. And really, we can start to see what this offense is it's a shot every once in a while through the air. And then it's running the ball consistently to try to get a first down with more of those quick hitters. Though they ran some stretch plays that were successful yesterday too. Once they got it going, they started to get a little bit of push up front, especially with Malik Davis, and they were able to get things moving. So to me, it was more of a philosophical thing. I mean, the run's working. You've got a young quarterback. He's on the road. You got to protect him. And whether you make the switch or not, I don't know that the play calling, I think, was the important part there.
Yeah, and really, I think this is an issue. It's a double-edged sword we've got going on here in more ways than one. Yes, we got the quarterback double-edged sword where, okay, perhaps they found something for the short term and we're worried about the long, but there's also the philosophical side of that, and I'm glad you brought that up. To me, it looks like what they are doing, they've found Malik Davis, they found Kadarius Toney. They're going to go to speed and elusiveness. They're going to focus on zone plays. They're going to get these guys out of there. They can't move anybody off the ball in the power game. So they're going to just take these defensive linemen and the linebackers where they want to go, stretch it out, get the whole bunch moving. And because those 2 players in Davis and Toney are excelling at sifting through traffic and finding cutback lanes, and they can, sting a defense for over pursuit, it's almost like they're giving up on the bread and butter of what McElwain wanted to do. So you've got some emerging identity, which I think is run the stretch plays, run the zones, let Malik Davis cut back, maybe a power run here and there. Let Kadarius Toney touch the ball as a slash player and then heave one to Cleveland here and there. But that's not what he came in here to do. That's not the offensive philosophy of Mac. And yes, I know coaches adapt to what they've got. I just don't believe that's what he ever wanted to do. And to me, I'm just going to say it, that kind of reminds me of the vacillations we saw as Muschamp kind of was swinging back and forth on what he wanted to do. And so I'm really hoping that as we move forward, we still see some of those, some of the elements that he came in here to do have some success, because I'm very happy about what we saw in that fourth quarter. I like where they're going with the personnel they've got, but I don't believe that's what he wants to do in the long term.
Yeah, I do think there were times, though, that they were firing off the ball. Like I mentioned last week, I wanted to see more under center, get up the field type of runs, and that's what they were having a lot of success with. I think the run game as a package just looked a whole lot better against Kentucky.
Yeah, but to Bill's point, they scored from the Wildcat formation twice, and they only ran it 4 times. And they had a lot of success with that with Toney, they had the success with the one play with Toney in the first half, and only went back to it once in the second. And I'm not entirely sure why. And then they brought Powell in for some of the Wildcat as well, and obviously he had some success too, but he doesn't necessarily have the throwing threat out of out of that configuration. So, again, is this really what they want to do? I'm not sure that matters. These are their best two players, and they're going to have to ride them.
Yep. I really want to focus on the 2 touchdown drive, guys, and you guys kind of mentioned it already in the fourth quarter, and just how big Kadarius Toney, Malik Davis, and Brandon Powell were in those drives. The first one, the first drive started with 11:27 left in the fourth quarter. Florida's on 20. I get started with Toney's 50-yard pass to Cleveland. Hey, look at there, some creativity. Got the score position for the Gators. The coaches finally trusted the players enough to get creative, and it worked. And Toney threw a dime to Cleveland, and the ball got rolling from there. After that, it was a 1-yard pass from Del Rio to Toney. And then on 2nd and 9, leaned on true freshman Malik Davis 4 plays in a row where he gained almost 6 yards a run, converted a 3rd and 3 with a 9-yard run, and took the Gators down to the 6-yard line. So to finish that drive, Brandon Powell, out of the Wildcats, scored the touchdown on which I thought he was going to be stopped short. It was 3rd and 2, and from the Kentucky 6, Powell willed his way into stretching into the end zone, and the Gators were probably ready to go for it on 4th down if he didn't get it. But the drive was 7 plays, 80 yards, took 3:29, and it was 27-21 Kentucky after that. And that was just one big play for Powell, as he had a really big play on the final drive as well when the Gators took the lead. The Gators defense forced a 3 and out. The offense gets the ball back and took over. From their own 42 there. But going back to that drive and Malik Davis taking over, and it started with the Toney, the throw there. I mean, to me, I got the ball rolling and some confidence in this offense in the fourth quarter.
Yeah, it absolutely did. And I mean, you look between Davis, Toney, and Cleveland, the guys we keep coming back to. Davis has 104 yards from scrimmage, 22 touches, 93 rush, 11 receiving yards. Toney's got 123 yards combined between pass rush and receiving. Then Cleveland added 4 catches for 110 yards. Like I said, late in the game here, they absolutely established some rhythm. They were kind of coming at the Wildcats from all angles, and I think those guys can be workhorses for this team moving forward.
No, I agree. And I think, like you said, the creativity on Toney's pass, certainly something that I think we've been calling for a long time. But, I think there were some things where they just said, you know what, we're going to give it to Malik Davis and trust that he's going to be able to get the ball to where they need to get it. And there were a few short runs where he got hit behind the line of scrimmage and still got it across the first down marker. I can't recall whether it was on this drive or the next one, but there were some that were really, really close, and he was able to get, even though he got hit short, he was able to get it across. So, getting the ball to your skill players, that's the job of the offensive coordinator and the head coach, right?
Hey, I want to add one more thing here. And Will, you wrote an article, and we've kind of talked about it a few times, how you felt like Toney should have been given a shot at quarterback, based on his completion percentage in high school, and if identified a correlation, how that carries over into college. And kind of took some heat for that. But, I kind of want to springboard off of that. And, I need to continue to watch the film from this game and see just how many of the successful runs did come on the stretch plays and, the zone schemes versus power. But if I'm seeing this correctly, and they are really trying to just keep things moving and find these cutbacks as much as I think, it's almost between these players that they've got here, it's almost like they're going to more spread concepts for the way they're moving the ball. The one problem with that is that if Del Rio is going to be the guy, he doesn't add that final element to that package. Do you think at this point, and I think there is a possibility of this, that Toney starts to see increased snaps from quarterback or Wildcat, even if he does not become the guy there?
Yeah, I think they've been really careful not to overload him at wide receiver. And if they've been careful not to overload him at wide receiver, I'm not sure that putting him at quarterback is necessarily going to solve that problem. I mean, he is. I mean, basically every time the guy touches the ball, you get a first down. So, do you want to take that and move it back behind center? I don't necessarily know that. I know that when I looked at his high school completion percentages, he had a pretty good yards per completion, yards per attempt average. He was completing over 70% of his passes. Looked at the film a little bit. I mean, there's not a whole lot out there, but he seemed to show some pretty decent pocket presence. Obviously made a really nice throw last night. I mean, it was a dime. So, I think they're going to have to obviously expand that package. I think they're, sort of like Tebow, maybe in 2006, you bring him in specific times, specific down and distances, make it hard on the defense. I mean, one of the things one of the things that if you go back and look at the touchdown run that he had in the Wildcat, is it was one of the few times I can remember where Florida actually had a numbers advantage up at the front. And having that numbers advantage made a huge difference. I believe it was Mark Thompson was able to make a kick out block that freed him. And Tony even cut the wrong direction and still had the speed to get in between the two defensive backs. If he'd have cut to the left, he would have just been home free, but he cut right, made it a little bit harder on himself. But I mean, the guy's a special player. I mean, you could see it from the tape in high school. It's hard to complete 70% of your balls against air. And that's actually one of the reasons why I also wrote something about Del Rio getting another shot, because he had completed 70% of his passes in high school, granted with a little bit lower yards per completion and yards per attempt average. But, the completion percentage he put up last year just doesn't mesh with what you see from high school, what that correlation does. And so, so really, to me, it seemed like it wasn't a surprise to me that Del Rio was getting real looks during fall practice.
Too bad Malik Zaire wasn't the better part of what we thought he could be, if this is the way the offense is going.
Yeah, and that's the thing with Zaire. I do not feel just based on what we've seen so far, I don't think it was so much that Franks ran away with things in practice, because he's obviously got some limitations there. But I think Zaire probably came in and disappointed. I think when Mac went out and got him, I don't think he was looking for a guy to wear a headset. I think he really did think that he would come in and start. And man, you're right. Right now, based on the way this offense is going, I think they might almost go with a full spread look at this point based on what they've got. But he's just obviously not that guy.
Well, and maybe that's actually a positive going forward, though, from the standpoint of there were 3 guys getting reps in fall camp. And now you've narrowed it down to 2, and maybe you've even narrowed it down to 1. I don't know. They'll have to ask the coaches about that this week. But getting those guys reps in an offense that's struggling to get rhythm, I think those reps are important. And conceivably, having 3 guys taking reps just wasn't the best thing, especially with Zaire coming in late, where you had to get him a bunch of reps to see what he had. And if they looked at it and said, "Hey, this just isn't the way we're going to go," then that's fine. But at that point, you would imagine that they had put some RPO type stuff in there, that they had put some read option, that they had tried some of those spread concepts. And maybe that's why we didn't see Tony in the first game, because he was sort of in the Zaire package. And by the time Zaire came in, they were so far behind, they just didn't run it.
Yeah. Let's move on to the last offensive drive of the game. And this was a drive, they needed to score. This is a needed to score drive. And there we have true freshman Malik Davis out there at running back. The coaches trusted him enough, even after the fumble last week versus Tennessee. He was the hot hand. He should have been out there, and he was. He received handoffs on the first 2 plays of the drive to get the Gators to 3rd and 1. After a false start, it was 3rd and 6, and then Brandon Powell saved the Gators. Nussmeier drew up a terrible call where Powell was the receiver of a screen after he motioned across the formation. It was quickly snuffed out, but Powell made some guys miss while getting upfield, getting the first down, keeping the drive alive for the Gators. One of the biggest plays of the game made by a player, not a coach. Perhaps the biggest play of the game comes later in the drive. 4th and 3, Del Rio scrambled out of the pocket, didn't have much, but found Mark Thompson. Bill alluded to that play earlier, to convert the play and keep the Gators alive. I'm not sure Franks has the poise to make that play right now. And that's just one of the reasons I think Del Rio was in the game at that time, because the game was coming down to crunch time. I think it was just the way the game was going. Mac trusted Del Rio in that type of situation more than he did Franks. So on 3rd and 8 later in the drive, Del Rio found Goolsby to get it to 4th and 1. Malik Davis converts that with a 7-yard run to the Kentucky 14. The Gators get to 3rd and 1 later at the UK 5, and Del Rio hits an uncovered Freddie Swain. The Gators go on to win. On that drive, the offense ate up 5 minutes and 48 seconds of game clock on 13 plays and 58 yards. They did what they needed to do, and Malik Davis was a big part why. 7 carries for 30 yards on that drive, converted a 4th and 1 with a 7-yard run. It was big time for a freshman in crunch time.
No, that's definitely true. I think the Goolsby play was probably the biggest one, to get it down to 4th and inches, allow them to give it to Davis and let him power through for 2 reasons. One is that you want to get as close as you can, obviously, but the other is that, I think that's sort of a confidence builder to be able to convert that 4th and 1.
Not only that, it went to a tight end who's been invisible lately.
Well, but again, to your point about the Powell play, that was a really special play. That's one of those things where, we pointed out last week that Kentucky has really tall DBs, and that some of the shiftier wide receivers might be able to make some missed tackles, and that's certainly what happened there. again, the only thing I would say is it did show us one of the limitations with Del Rio, because he had Cleveland pretty wide open on a long shot, and he threw it behind him, and it made it a difficult play, and they weren't able to track it down. I mean, again, I think you can live with that if the entire field is open, even if there's a even if there's a ceiling to how far downfield you can go. But that is sort of the limitation. I know McElwain mentioned it afterwards that he had missed that deep shot. But, he was able to recover, make that fourth down play, and obviously that was huge.
And he had another nice throw where the Powell went out of bounds on the wheel route.
No, that was a really nice play. In fact, it looked like it was a modification of what they did last week for the Davis run for the touchdown where he fumbled it at the end. They had that same action going on in the backfield and then slipped Powell down the sideline and were able to hit him. So a really nice play design. And obviously just 1 foot out of bounds.
Yeah, and just to touch on that pass where Del Rio missed Cleveland, it was missed pretty badly to the right side there, which would be to the wrong side of the post route. It's just something it's really hard for him to come back at that point. But in a lot of cases, I think just having Cleveland out there is going to give you a little leeway and cover up for some of those mistakes if it's not that badly misplaced. But kind of in the bigger picture here, I mean, let's face it, a 13-play, 58-yard touchdown drive has been kind of like a unicorn in Gainesville lately. I mean, they just don't happen very often, but here we are 2 weeks in a row, and unlike 2016, where we've complained a lot about second half adjustments, well, now we got 2 games in a row, 2 nail-biter wins where Florida's come out and really turned it on and cleared some things up in the fourth quarter and won the game on offense. So that in itself is encouraging, and that's a good sign. And not only that, but here you are saying, hey, I really like that play call, just like we saw last week with the sweep to Malik Davis where he fumbled after a 70-something yard gain. So those are things that you listeners out there need to hear those things out of our mouth. If we're saying, hey, this is a great play, that means, wait a minute, maybe there's hope for this play calling. So, and at least that's the encouragement I'm taking from it.
No, I definitely think that's true, Bill. And I mean, my article today may have come off as overly negative. It wasn't intended that way, but when I went back and reread it, it did. And more than anything, it was a process versus a results thing. I mean, the results of the game are excellent, right? You win, you come back in the fourth quarter, you gain hopefully a burst of confidence from that. You win on the road. The question is the process behind the decision making and sort of, what's going on behind the scenes to make those sorts of decisions. And the quarterback switch against Michigan, the quarterback switch now, and those sort of things. So, and then obviously the run versus pass that I talked about earlier in terms of the ratios. But a win is a win, and you got to be happy about it when you win on the road in the SEC.
Yeah, and if you're being objective about this, there's 2 narratives you could buy into at this point. I mean, on the one hand, you're 2-1, 2-0 in the East. You just extended a 31 game win streak against Kentucky on the road in a letdown situation, without 9 players, with your 2 best offensive players out after the Will Grier thing. That's what I call the adversity narrative. And in that narrative, I can understand why people say, look, next year is the year you need to see progress. But then on the other hand, you look at the horrible record versus ranked teams, the horrible record when teams score over 14 points, the horrible record against the rivals. You look at, how the whole staff has had to almost be turned over. And then, let's be honest, the football team coming from the Florida Gators has not looked well coached in these 3 games now. And it looks very consistent in that regard, that in all 3 phases, there's major problems. I'm concerned by that. But I do hold that both narratives still have merit at this point.
Yeah, I mean, I said in the podcast last week, and it was hard saying it again while watching the game because we all want it to look so much better. But I did say on the podcast last week, get out of Lexington any way possible with a victory. You were playing a young quarterback. I mean, no excuse. I still expect to see steps being made, but they weren't necessarily made. But it was get out of there any way possible and come back home with these 3 straight road games that you have, because maybe you catch fire at home and you hit something. You get Vandy, who is very beatable, but their defense is going to give this Florida offense some trouble. LSU and A&M coming up as well. But all these games are at home, so it was just important to go on the road and come back with a victory.
I keep hearing Dave throw these little zingers out there about that was a horrible call. These steps were made. He's throwing shade, but he's doing it like so fast and subtle tonight.
You should have heard Will last night when we were texting. He was like, "Man, I need to watch a game with you." And I was like, I don't know."
He's throwing like real subtle shade. Our listeners are catching it, Dave. I don't think you're getting away with that. Man.
I could be nice and mean at the same time.
Yeah, smiling face, throwing knives. Well, you mentioned something. You let me know when you're ready to talk about defense here, because you just mentioned something that concerns me.
No, Will, anything else on offense before we move forward?
No, I'm good. I think we've covered it.
All right, I think so too. All right, guys. Defense gave up 3 touchdowns. One of those was set up by a 52-yard punt return from Kentucky. Defensive line did a good job getting pressures and sacks. Steve Johnson was just good enough in the first half of the game to kind of squirm away from the pressure a good bit, making it a little bit worse. Florida was getting in the backfield, but he was just making some good plays on his end. It's bad assignment football for the linebackers right now. There's not much discipline there with gap and edge control. The opponent's screen game continues to be a sore spot for this defense. Depth is really becoming an issue here. Tackling problems can be a sign across the board, but Chauncey Gardner really struggled there again. 2 weeks in a row, we've seen that. No form at all right now, and it's becoming a big problem as he's getting exposed, because this front seven is getting exposed at times too. So there's some good, there's some bad, but it can't get worse from here, because unless they can start relying on this offense a little bit more, they can't rely on these fourth quarter comebacks from this offense right now consistently. I know it's 2 games in a row, but it's been a long time since we could say an offense has bailed out a defense. But this defense came up well at times. They played good in the clutch in the fourth quarter, but there were some glaring weaknesses on this defense still.
I think it can get worse, and I'll tell you why. You've got Darius Geis on the schedule. You've got Ralph Webb on the schedule. You've got Chubb and Michelle. And I'm a little concerned here, Dave. I had a media member reach out to me with some statistics today. And I don't think he wanted to be identified because some of his affiliations, but he's a national level guy. And he gave me these numbers, and I double checked this, and he was off by like 1 carry and 2 yards. But I digress. It was really close otherwise. Against Michigan, Tennessee, and Kentucky, Florida has allowed there's been 90 carries by running backs on opposing offenses for 530 yards and a 5.9 yard per carry average. That is horrible. That's horrible. So we're averaging almost, 175 yards a game or more. And the average has gotten worse by the game. 5.4 yards a carry versus Michigan, 6.3 yards a carry against Tennessee, and 6.5 yards a carry by running backs versus Kentucky. Just like I told people in the preseason, the focus shouldn't be on replacing the secondary. It's up front at defensive tackle. And we've seen some inconsistency at linebacker like we've expected. This front seven loves to get upfield. These guys love to rush the passer, but when they're run at with a running back, they're having major problems. The depth of defensive tackle is extremely suspect. There literally is no scholarship depth now at linebacker except for Rayshad Jackson. And like I said, Geis is coming up. Webb's coming up. Michelle and Chubb are coming up. FSU is going to be running the ball now heavily because of their situation. I'm very concerned about this defense right now. They make plays, they fly around, but they've got problems.
Yeah, well, one of the things that you really noticed if you watch the game is just the chunk plays. So both on the ground and through the air. So King on the ground had a 30-yard run. Snell obviously had the long run that was called back on the critical holding call at the end. But even through the air, Johnson had a 27-yard catch. Conrad had a 23-yard catch for a touchdown where he was just wide open. King had a 24-yard one. Snell, these are running backs, right? So King and Snell are catching the ball out of the backfield and running. And then Ross had a 21-yard catch as well. So, you're talking about 5 plays that generated 100 yards through the air, just explosive plays. And Kentucky on 7 of their 8, or 7 of their first 8 possessions, they got into Florida, into Florida's side of the field, which meant even if they didn't score, they were pinning the Gators deep. And certainly they did that on the one punt that they just buried right at the 1. So, the offense takes a lot of the criticism, and deservedly so, in the past. But the reality is that if you're starting at your 1 all the time, you're not necessarily going to score a whole lot of points. So the chunk plays really are the thing that would concern me. I think they're I think that 5.5 yard average, I think that's, sort of 1-1-1-30 or 3-3-3-30. And that 31 though has just been killing them. And those are the types of things you're going to have to eliminate.
Yeah, and some of that's coming from the missed tackles. I mean, like you guys mentioned that. I don't want to pick on any one player too much, but Gardner had another rough day, and I saw him miss at least 5 tackles. And when you've got problems up front against the run, and you've got guys getting pinned in, not setting the edge, when you have linebackers that are kind of getting caught looking, and they're still young and just having some recognition issues, the last thing you need is for your safeties to not be there as that last line of defense, and that's kind of what's happening right now. And that's easy situation where you bust a 6-yard run into a 16 to 26-yard run, and that'll kill you.
The only thing I would say to that is that by the time Kentucky had their, by the time Kentucky decided they were going to sort of try to take the air out of the ball and run the clock, they had almost a 9-minute time advantage on time of possession in that third quarter. And obviously some of that is because the defense was struggling to get off the field, but some of that was also because there were an awful lot of 3-and-outs. And, so these things all go hand in hand. I think some of those statistics are due to fatigue, and I think some of those statistics are due to depth. And I think those two things are also interrelated, right? That your depth becomes a problem when you get fatigued, and then obviously Joseph going out on the targeting penalty just exacerbated things.
Man, I'm just going to blame him for not having a pick 6 this game.
Yeah, come on, Chris Henderson. What's the matter?
Hey, he almost got one.
Yeah, he did.
Yep.
But hey, let's be honest. If there's one place on
I think you were going where I was about to go. Yep.
Go ahead.
No, go ahead. Go ahead. You were going where I was about to go.
I was going to say, if we got one position right now where you're just not having a lot of problems, it's the corners. You got 2 freshmen out there, pretty much locking it down. And I don't know if you saw my tweet today, but they went at Marco Wilson at least 3 times in the first half deep, and he just was having none of it. Just got nothing out of it. And man, you talk about a confidence builder for a coach and for a young player and for a unit. I mean, that sends a message, and that's just awesome.
Yeah, the one touchdown was Duke Dawson gave up. And he was out of position kind of from the get-go, playing catch-up, never turned his head, and it was a touchdown for Kentucky. But I'm really impressed with what we're seeing with these freshman corners, and they are the least of the worries on defense right now.
Yeah, and they're playing up in their faces, manned up. It's not like they're 15 yards off the ball either,
The one play it did look like on the first touchdown for Kentucky where Washington got beat. It did look like the corner cheated up. I believe it was Marco Wilson, but I'm not sure on that. I believe he did sort of jump a short route, and that sort of left Washington a little bit exposed on the back end, made the throw a little bit easier for Johnson. I think it's a touchdown anyway because it was a perfect throw. But and again, those are the types of things you're going to see even with experienced corners. I don't know if that's necessarily a young corner thing. I think it's just an aggressive corner thing.
Yeah, I was actually kind of curious about that because they actually scored on that and a similar play later on, and you might be right. And Marco Wilson may have jumped that route inappropriately and released, and Nick Washington wasn't able to recover. But it almost looked like they had both linebackers sitting tight in the box there, even after they recognized a pass. And it looked like David Reese, I think it was, may have been spying the quarterback in that situation. But it kind of made me wonder if you're going to spy him and you got a slot receiver and all you got is the corner and the safety, then why is the safety trying to cover a whole half of the field? I don't know. It just kind of looked funky to me.
Yeah, well, I mean, regardless of what it was, I think the wide receiver could have broken either direction and would have been open at that point. It's just, I mean, it's putting Washington in a space that he's just not really. I mean, it's not even a matter of ability. It's a matter of that's an awful lot of space for that one person to cover.
Right, and that's exactly what I was alluding to. I mean, it's just a difficult play to make.
Yeah, one player I was glad to see. This is what I expected this year coming from C.C. Jefferson. He came on. He was a spotlight for a while for this Gator defense from the defensive end position, putting pressure back there on Johnson, Taven Bryan from the tackle position. Had some big plays getting in the backfield. Like we said, this front seven it's hit or miss right now. It's feast or famine at times. And to Will's point, these chunk plays are really what's killing this Florida defense. And what I noticed as well, if they could just stop these chunk plays, that will come a long way. But there are so many things that feed to that narrative right now of the chunk plays, whether it be the missed tackles, miscommunication, picking their eyes in the backfield, not just being in the right spot at the right time. There's plenty of things to fix, but wait for good for those guys to settle down and kind of keep Kentucky at bay when they really needed to.
Yeah, and hey, listen, there's some good metrics out here on this defense right now. I mean, they're 11th in the nation with 10 sacks at this point, but they've only played 3 games where only one other team above them has played 3 games. And so you got to think they're actually about second in the nation in sacks per game right now. So they're getting after it. Their third down defense, they're 25th in the nation. The red zone defense, 21st in the nation. So there are signs there that they are impacting offenses, that they are dictating some pace, making plays. I just think they're just taking their lumps right now. And I'm okay with that in the sense that this is a rebuilding team, that they got some youth. They just need to get some more guys in there to bolster the ranks.
Yeah, well, I mean, and that's what you saw. The drives that got stalled either got stalled because Kentucky made a mistake, some sort of false start, some sort of holding penalty, something like that, or because somebody on Florida's defensive line made a great individual play and was able to knock the Wildcats off schedule, and so they were able to stop the drives that way. So the one I'm thinking about in particular is Zuniga when he met the quarterback and the running back at the mesh point and took him down. And that was a huge point in the game, right? I mean, that was one of those things where, if they bust that for a first down, then all of a sudden they run 3-4 minutes off the clock and you just don't have time to come back. So, when they needed that play, the defensive line was able to get into the backfield. And a lot of that, I think, was tied to Del Rio coming in and giving them a blow in the second half and letting them relax a little bit and have a little bit of a break.
Yeah, some good stats to back up Bill here. Just in the SEC, tied for fifth with 10 sacks, but sacks per game first with 3. So that kind of speaks to the narrative there about games played. Tackles for loss, seventh with 23. Tackles for loss per game, second with 7, almost 8 a game. So interceptions, we already know, second in the league there with 5. Third down conversion, third with only 29.5% converted on this Gator defense. So they're kind of opportunistic. If that's the way I would explain this Gator defense right now. They're very opportunistic. We've seen the pick sixes, getting off the field on third down, and the big sacks and the tackles for loss. But it's just these chunk plays right now that are keeping this defense from being even better right now.
Yeah, and they're flying around. I mean, Voshon Joseph is going to get charged for war crimes for what he did to those players out there. I mean, they're playing with violence. They're playing with aggression. They're making it, for the most part. All right, it's the linebackers. Other than that mistake he made, I think there is a little recognition issue. Sometimes they're getting pinned in, and not feeling where they should. But for the most part, this defense is playing football out there. They're not. It's not like they're soft. It's not like they're not talented. It's just making mistakes, and a lot of those are over aggression, and then there's some depth issues. I mean.
It is what it is.
Well, and it's what we should have expected from the experiences we've had previously. So if you remember Tebow's Heisman year in 2007, the 2006 defense pretty much had a mass exodus through graduation into the NFL, and they had some really good players on that 2007 defense. I mean, Hayden was out on the outside. They had a bunch of really good players on the defense, but they were all very, very young. And by 2008, they were all very, very good. And I think that's kind of what you're looking at. Maybe what we should have expected is some of these miscommunications, some of this over-aggression. But to your point, Bill, it's not an effort thing. And that I think really impressed me about the game is at no point did I feel like Florida came in and was flat. And if anything, I thought maybe they were a little bit too jacked in the first half. There was a lot of jawing and a lot of chippiness, particularly on the one drive where they got 2 personal foul penalties in the same play. But so I don't think effort's the problem. I think it's youth, and I think it's depth as well, and that combination. I mean, I guess if you were going to say one thing about the 2007 team is that depth probably wasn't an issue. Youth may have been an issue, but depth wasn't. I think now, depth may be an issue.
Yeah, and let's remember here what they've still got sitting on the bench that's just brand new and not ready yet. I mean, Antonius Clayton, who's a player that I really believe in, is going to be special. He's just not quite ready yet. Then you got Tadarius Slayton and Conliffe. That they're getting some reps, but they're teenagers, man, and they're just not ready yet. But they're out there mixing it up. When those guys take that next step forward on the line and provide some of that defensive tackle depth, when they get another recruiting class in there and hopefully get these suspensions resolved at linebacker, and then you've got Brad Stewart waiting in the wings at safety, and I mean, the whole secondary class they brought in is going to be raring to go. So this defense should they should make a major step forward in 2018. So I think we've got every reason to believe that this is a classic rebuilding year. I think 2007 at this point does look like a very fair analog, and that maybe good things are ahead.
For sure. Bill, you had some special teams points out you wanted to make for that side of the ball.
Yeah, I'll just kind of make this quick. I mean, special teams is going to be a weird thing to track. There's not going to be like if you go with the ESPN efficiency metric, it's going to look a little skewed on the positive side because you got a great kicker and a great punter. But right now things are a little bit of a mess over there. Although the blocks are good, they're still ranking very highly in the country with a couple of blocks so far. Let me see here. Look at all these stats.
Where's that spreadsheet?
Yeah, okay, here we go. Kickoff return, they're only 63rd nationally. Punt return is only 70th nationally. Punt return defense, which I know they're getting the ball down the field on punts, but they're 119th nationally and allowing 17.3 yards per return.
It was terrible against Kentucky at times.
Yeah, the return games, I've heard people say, oh, the return games were good against Michigan or Tennessee. I'm like, no, man. I mean, I know that they had that one last week that was pretty good after a penalty or whatever, but that's got to change. You've got athletes at Florida where you should be able to generate return yardage, and that's just not good. So it's kind of a mixed bag over there. But again, it kind of plays to the point that they just don't look tight and well coached from top to bottom in any phase of the game right now. And I know they've got a lot going on. Again, you can kind of take that other narrative, the positive adversity narrative, and say, oh, it'll come. And maybe it will, but it's a concern right now, and it's a very fair concern.
But how do you help a struggling offense? You get the hidden yardage, and special teams is one of those.
Well, so that's actually something I wrote about over the summer. Is I talked about how the wide receiver depth was going to really help them in special teams. And I think depth in general helps you on special teams. And that, I think, is where the suspensions start to really become significant. So having no Callaway on the field and no Scarlett on the field means people like Malik Davis and people like Kadarius Toney aren't on special teams because they're too valuable on offense to have them injured on a kickoff return. And if you put Toney back there on a kickoff return, I'd love to see what he can do, but you can't afford to do it because he's so integral to what you're trying to do on offense. So and the other thing is what kind of time are you able to spend on special teams if the guy has to double dip on defense or on offense? And so you're trying to get this young guy up to the point where he's to where he's sticking his assignment on defense or where he's running the right route on offense. And then, you're also putting him on special teams. Is it a surprise that he come a little bit out of his gap? So, I think that's one of the places where depth really makes a difference. And I think maybe we'll see that as the year goes along, they'll get a little bit better. Certainly having Townsend back there helps on the punt coverage.
Yeah, for sure. And and speaking to that part, Will, and one player kind of just singled out, Dre Massey, for all the hype that he got last year before he got hurt, and then going into this year, we haven't seen anything from this guy. I know he's back there at he was back there at kick returner a little bit last night. And don't get me wrong, I'm not saying it's his fault. It was part of this is being limited at quarterback right now, but that's just one player I expected to see something from. We haven't seen, besides Freddie Swain's wide open touchdown last night, I haven't seen much from him either. And Josh Hammond. It was just some of the receivers we expected to hear more from, especially with Callaway out, we just haven't really seen yet.
Yeah, I think you got to be careful when you got a guy coming off a pretty serious knee injury to project exactly what you're going to get out of him. So, if you look at Georgia's running back Nick Chubb, he averaged 7.1 yards in 2014, 8.1 in 2015. He only averaged 5 yards per carry last year, and now he's back up to 6.3, 2 years removed from that injury. And I think maybe that's what we're seeing with Massey a little bit is, yes, he's back, yes, he can play, but does he have the same explosion? Does he have the same trust in the injury? Dave, you and I have talked about, I blew out my knee, and every time I go out there to play basketball again, every time it's time to cut on that leg, that's when I'm like, I'll give up that layup. So again, it's not an excuse, the guy's out there, but at the same time, I do think that explosion takes some time to come back. I think you talk to most people, they'll say the timeline to come back from an ACL injury is 9 to 12 months, but the time to be fully back is probably more in the 18-month range. And so maybe towards the end of the year, we'll start to see some of that explosion.
I'll request his medical records, and we'll take a look at those MRIs.
I think as we covered each side of the ball there, and just kind of reaction from the Kentucky game. Bill, you threw out a poll that got pretty good traction out there on Twitter today, and I know a lot of interaction from our followers out there.
Yeah, it's been great today. Twitter I had to adjust my notifications. It was kind of getting out of control today.
Oh, man, this morning was crazy, yeah.
It was a lot of fun. And if I haven't gotten back to you guys, I'll definitely try to. You guys know I do try. But I threw out a poll just this afternoon. I said, okay, Gators, after a 2-1 start, how do you feel about the season so far? And I promised them we would discuss a few of the responses. And the options I gave them here were more encouraged, versus the beginning of the season, more concerned, or not sure what to think. And I think a lot of us have felt a little confused by what we've seen, and it's hard to dissect and make sense of given the circumstances, especially when you consider the Gators have played some teams that are of suspect quality and lost to one that's highly ranked. But we had about 800 responses so far. 14%, only 14% said they are more encouraged. They have a more optimistic outlook at this point. 36% said they are more concerned. And then 50% said they weren't sure what to think. So that shows us that, 86% either are thinking more negatively or they're just very confused on things. And I think that they're saying the jury is still out and waiting and seeing. And when you look at a few of these responses, let's see here, Eric Stephen Foss was one at ESF 0242. He said, hey, 9 scholarship players are out. 2 are the top offensive stars. No depth at linebacker, and the D is playing freshman. He's saying, look, there's a good reason to see the struggles we've seen. Christian at Gator 2828 said this was always a rebuilding year. Just hard to tell with so many people missing. And, and then one was kind of optimistic. Jason I. Williams, or maybe it's Jason L. Williams at JWill 815 Leo said, this team's going to look completely different by the end of the season, and they're going to come together and gel and become dominant. And I sure hope so. But then on the other hand, you had some people at Cravenson James, said our 2 wins are against bad football teams. Dan Young said he's still very concerned. The offense still hasn't progressed, and we got lucky with 2 busted coverage in the passing game. Guys, let's face it. Florida doesn't win that game if Kentucky runs cornerbacks on the field and knows who plays, or at least it's very difficult.
But one of them they probably don't score. One of them they probably still do score.
Really, I think that's true. I think the late one, Florida probably punches it in there. They had some real offensive momentum at that point, so I probably would backpedal off that a little bit. And just to wrap that up, one other negative: John Sigel at JRSIGL says if this was year 1 of the MAC era, he'd feel really good, winning games with young playmakers and promising recruiting. But it's year 3, so skeptical. And I can certainly understand that. And then lastly, those who don't know, our friend Tony Agalini says he's not sure what to think. He'll know more at the bye week. NWF at Natural Works, he's not sure. The OL has progressed each week. Quarterback shouldn't be a mystery going into the 4th game in the 3rd year, but they are playing well in spurts. And Chris Anderson at CA Everyday says, I think we're 3 games into the season. This team still has no identity. Is our defense still great? What offense are we running? Who's the quarterback? And guys, we're going to find out those questions as we go through the season, but I think they're excellent comments as always, and we really appreciate you guys submitting them.
Yeah, for sure. I think where my mind goes first with that question is this team could easily be 0-3 right now. Very easily be 0-3 right now. They found a way to win 2 of those games, but that's kind of where I lean right now, is not really knowing what this team is, because some people say should be 0-3, could be 0-3, but they're 2-1.
Yeah, I mean, that's it. Go ahead, Will.
No, I just think that at some point, when is it going to stop? That McElwain has this magical touch in these close games. I mean, he's 9-1 in Florida now in games that are just the games that are 1 score or less. He's 17-4 overall in his career. So, I wrote something that looked at the tape and sort of said, hey, he makes decisions that really lead to this. I think in the case of Tennessee and in the case of Kentucky, the ability to not self-destruct maybe was just as important as making major decisions. But 9-1 just isn't sustainable no matter how good you are. And so at some point that's gonna maybe it's not 50-50, but at some point it's gonna be 60% of your games or 65% of your games you'll win because of your coaching acumen. But 90%, there's a lot of luck involved there. And so at some point sitting on this edge is going to be a problem. And I just don't know when that's going to come.
Well, look, Butch Jones made some boneheaded decisions last week. And when was the last time a team didn't cover a wide receiver twice?
Out of timeouts.
I've never seen it once.
Right. I mean, it's like voodoo, man. Like he's got something he's blackmailing these coaches with. He's pointing at him. He's like, "Don't you forget? I'll do it. I'll tell them." And he's like, "Fine, don't send a corner out there this time." And they're like, "What? Just do it."
But yeah, that. I mean, that was a really good question and really good responses I hear. Like you said, it is. More people were leaning, not knowing where this team is going, and I can't blame them.
Yeah, I don't. I see the viability of the whole adversity narrative, but we're in year 3, man, and there's some lingering concerns.
Well, what was our saying going in this year? No excuses, but they are piling up. But it's in year three, it's still hard to use excuses.
And something we're going to be discussing soon is, what culpability do you have in some of these things that you're using as excuses?
Yeah. Yep.
Well, and the other thing I think is that at 0-3, it's no excuses. At 2-1, you're like, hey, we'll take it.
Oh yes.
Right. Yep. So I mean, you win the game. If you're going to win those close games, hey, we're going to have to enjoy the ride as opposed to maybe what would be happening if it was 0-3. The other thing is, I do think that the Tennessee game was something that Florida kind of had in control. Once the pick six happened in the fourth quarter, I think Florida did establish themselves as the superior team in the first half, at least in my opinion. Yesterday I think was a little bit the opposite. I think Florida's really fortunate to get out of that game yesterday.
Yeah, but hey, here's a warning to our listeners and just to everybody out there in Gator Nation. If you're a negative Nelly and you just can't stand Coach Mack and want him fired, or if you're a sunshine pumper and you just think that all the criticizers should stop their yapping and just be satisfied, you're both probably going to be disappointed, because this is something that they're going to have some struggles. They're going to have some good moments of success, and this debate is probably going to endure into 2018. So my recommendation is, wherever your disposition is on that, keep collecting evidence, keep a level head. But this is going to be a long debate, I think.
Yeah, one thing I don't like seeing, and I don't really like calling people out, but the narrative of, oh, Florida needs to lose this game to get on with Jim McElwain. I never want to see my team lose.
Me either, man.
What's the fun of watching football if you ever wish a loss upon your own team?
I don't want to see anybody get fired either. I mean, I want to see the team progress.
Exactly.
I want to see it get better. I want to step back and say, hey, I was wrong. They've turned a corner. Thank God we didn't get rid of Nussmeier, didn't get rid of McElwain. Like, I want that to be the narrative. I want the team to do well. At the same time, you can't just say, well, we're going to give them endless amounts of rope and keep going. So to Bill's point, I think, you're going to be disappointed if you don't involve nuance in the discussion. And sometimes that's lacking.
I know this is sadistic, but I really enjoyed watching those Kentucky fans sitting there after the game for a while yesterday. Just because got out an evil laugh, and they were just, it's just like their whole world collapsed.
Yeah, some of them took the whole Hurricane Irma stuff too far, and all the stuff they were putting out there. But oh well. And the guy for Kentucky Sports Radio, I forget who's claimed Kentucky was going to beat Florida for years now. I wonder if he'll do it again next year.
I have my public service announcement there today, but I can hold it till Twitter if you want me to.
How long is it?
Oh, it'll just take me a second.
All right, wrap it up with that then.
All right, guys. As you know, our friends in Kentucky made some signs about how if Irma didn't, they use an expletive there, mess you up, I'll say, then UK will, and I don't like that. I'm not a smack talker. I'm really not. But when I see people doing things that are just out of bounds, it kind of ruffles my feathers. And so I took it upon myself to reflect back on 1986, the last time Kentucky beat Florida, and the 31-0 winning streak and the things that have happened since then, a little facts about 1986. And I just want to remind those who made that sign and our Kentucky friends that Mike Tyson hadn't won a heavyweight title the last time he beat Florida. Eddie Murphy was funny the last time he beat Florida. Top Gun was a brand new movie. Marshawn Lynch was a baby. Tim Tebow wasn't even born yet. And the movie Aliens was out, and Bill Paxton uttered his famous words, "Game over, man." And little did you know he could have been talking about you. Kentucky, like Florida after Irma, probably didn't even have electricity, and parts of it probably still don't. And I don't want to say that you're a basketball school, but after Voshon Joseph got ejected, I think I heard somebody asking if there were going to be free throws. So why don't you just accept your fate and get ready for 32 in 2018? That is all.
Okay, drop your mic.
He's a poet. He's a poet.
Oh, that was good. That's some good stuff. Especially the electricity. There we go.
I've been there, man. I'm just saying.
That might get replayed, Bill. I might have to just cut that out by itself and put it out somewhere.
Seriously, I lived like in an area that was near Kentucky in Ohio for a while, and there was a town there called Ashland, Kentucky, and their two most famous residents that were from there were Billy Ray Cyrus and Charles Manson. I kid you not. It's called Ashland, Kentucky. Look it up. Anyway, that is all, sir.
All right. Anything else, guys? Will?
Nah, I think we've covered it.
Yep. And even got that last PSA out by Bill. So I think we're all covered from every angle right now.
Go Gators.
Go Gators. 28-27, Florida over Kentucky. Way to go, Gators, to get that one out of there at the end and escape Lexington for 31 straight. So for Will, for Bill, I'm Dave. Thanks for listening to Gators Breakdown.